thing that's interesting as well is James's team running both the Moltres and the Zapdos. That's a really nice switch in if maybe something like a Precipice Blades is coming away from the opposing Groudon. It does just give him a couple of options in terms of ball position to maybe try and switch around. So I think, Lee, we should jump right into game one and see exactly what our players are going to lead. It's certainly a very interesting matchup, and I'm looking forward to seeing how James is going to be able to counteract the Sun mode of Francesco's side. Oh, I'm delighted to see it. On Francesco's side, there is a Regieleki and a Charizard facing down against a Fire and Electric type of James's side with the Incineroar and the Zapdos.
Yeah, we've got your favorite electric type on one side and my favorite electric type on one side, so it's perfect here. But yeah, I mean, the Regieleki here in a little bit of an awkward spot because of the fake out from the Incineroar on James's side of the field. It is going to be able to disrupt the Regieleki this turn, prevent it from getting that Electro Web off or big attack into the Zapdos potentially. But then it does create the option for Francesco to potentially take advantage of that fake out and switch in the Groudon here. But if you do that, you're risking, especially if you max with your Charizard, if you are risking a speed tie with the Zapdos potentially. But if you want to risk it, then it's always worth the risk. But not wanting to play too risky this first turn and losers bracket, just taking things slowly, switching that Charizard out for safer times ahead.
Yeah, the Zapdos certainly applied a lot of pressure to the Charizard. You can see in the move pool as well, there's not only electric type moves, there's rock type moves on there as well, something Charizard doesn't want to take at all. So switching out there, bringing in the Incineroar there as well that can apply the fake out in the following turn. James, however, it looks like he is going straight away for the Dynamax, going to beat that Zapdos. So going to be able to start applying some pressure with something like a Max Airstream. You mentioned, Lee, that the speed here is going to be so critical. So I think making sure that you can get that Max Airstream up on your side does give you that advantage, particularly in the face of a Regieleki, which is why it's so great to have Incineroar on the field that can go for that fake out and stop it going for any potential Electro Webs at this stage. The Max Airstream as well, going to be able to connect down onto the Incineroar that switched in.
Yeah, and you know, you would maybe think, well, you're kind of covering bases here, aren't you, with the Zapdos? You know, you want to get damage onto the Charizard in case it does go for its Gigantamax, and if it does switch out into something like the Groudon, you want to be getting a little bit, back for the target into that slot. So the Regieleki, not really something you're too concerned about right now because, you know, the sash has been broken by your own Incineroar, and you're going to be able to get maybe Flare Blitz off into that slot or maybe a Parting Shot to readjust. But you're you're kind of locked into going for these Airstreams now if you are Zapdos, just to keep ahead of the curve, because these Electro Webs that the Regieleki can kind of apply this next turn are going to be there until you remove it from the field. So a big kind of thorn that James needs to remove from the field as soon as possible.
Well, Incineroar going to go for the fake out to the opposing Incineroar there for James. Just stops it going for any kind of damage in this turn. And the Electro Web, like you said, Lee, this is what's going to be coming out from this Regieleki, lowering the speed back down to neutral of the Incineroar and the Zapdos. But Zapdos says, what you can do, I can also do. I'm going to boost my speed right back up. So it is still going to be at +1. And like you said, it does kind of force the Zapdos and the Regieleki into this kind of stalemate where one is always trying to boost up the speed and the Regieleki is always trying to bring it back down. So it does kind of force James to keep going for these Max Airstreams. But they are dealing a decent amount of damage to this Incineroar.
Yeah, and you know, the Incineroar's in range now to go down from another Airstream this turn, so that would be ideal. You know, the perfect situation for James is here you pick up the knockout onto the Incineroar, you Flare Blitz into the Regieleki, and you get a double knockout, which is ideal. But then, you know, Francesco's done a nice job of stalling out these Dynamax turns without losing really too much in the process, you know. And is Zapdos going to be that effective against maybe a Groudon that could potentially come in from Francesco, which you likely think is in the back? It potentially will outspeed Charizard if we do see another Airstream here, which we do. So it makes that matchup a little bit easier. But again, the Groudon coming in could be a little bit more problematic. But then again, James still has all 4 Pokemon intact here, as we do see the Incineroar finally drop on Francesco's side of the field.
James does have all 4 Pokemon, but the Dynamax will now end at the end of this turn. So Francesco still an opportunity to maybe obviously go for his own Dynamax when the Pokemon come back in, and maybe even start going for some Airstreams of his very own on something like the Charizard to kind of then get the speed advantages back up on his side of the field. Zapdos, it's great that you've got the speed up, but the other critical thing is you're only getting the speed up on the Zapdos and the Incineroar. If either of those Pokemon switch out or get KO'd, that speed advantage has been lost for James.
Yeah, and you know, that's the problem, I think. You're tied to kind of keeping these Pokemon in the field, and now if we do see the Charizard Gigantamax, it's definitely not going to go down to a Zapdos Thunderbolt, is it? And you know, the Regieleki in a position where it can just get rid of that speed boost quite easily now with another Electro Web, making it very difficult for Zapdos to really function. And we do see it's actually got the Assault Vest there, so you know, it might be able to take an attack from this Charizard. It probably will be, but if we do see the Groudon switch for the Regieleki, it's still going to be difficult, because I don't see the Charizard going down to a Thunderbolt here from a Zapdos if it does decide to go for that Gigantamax.
Yeah, that's the thing, particularly if it's Gigantamax, like you said, it's going to get that extra HP boost, going to be able to survive out any of those electric type moves a little bit more. I wonder though, however, with that ancient power that's on there, if that could factor into things as well, kind of being 4 times weak. Interesting change though here from James, going to be bringing in the Solgaleo as well, a Pokemon we haven't been able to showcase a lot on the broadcast so far, so lovely to see it jumping into the action. And Francesco does go for the Gigantamax on the Charizard, so going to be able to apply a lot of pressure with fire type moves to that Solgaleo that's just joined the field, and of course be able to set up any residual damage in the same way. The Electro Web comes out once again from that Regieleki, lowering the speed of the Zapdos right back down to neutral, and Solgaleo of course now at -1. Charizard is going to go for that max airstream, going to be able to do some good damage to that Solgaleo and critically just make sure the speed advantage is forever now in Francesco's favor, being able to get up to +1, whereas the Zapdos has kind of been put back to its normal neutral speed here.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Lou, I think this is a situation that you outlined exactly. You know, the problem is, as soon as the Incineroar or the Zapdos go off the field, you lose all your speed boosts, and as long as that Regieleki is still sitting on the field for Francesco, he's got the ability to kind of just remove those speed boosts anyway, while you kind of take advantage of your own Gigantamax, which we're seeing with the Charizard, and get those additional speed boosts on top of that. Now the Charizard's in an amazing position to go for its G-Max Wildfire move and get that residual damage kind of starting on the field, and you know, you'll be able to remove the Solgaleo or potentially the Zapdos here, and you've still got one Pokemon in the back. I don't know what the Solgaleo is going to do. Obviously, it doesn't get its speed reduced by the Electro Web because of its full metal body ability, which prevents the stat drops. So that's helpful. But again, it's always going to be slower than a Charizard in most situations without any additional speed control.
Yeah, exactly. Solgaleo just going to retreat here, bring in the Incineroar, going to be able to apply some pressure with the Fake Out, maybe into the Regieleki for the next turn. James has to find a way to stop it in its tracks. These Electro Webs are doing a lot of damage in terms of the speed tiers and constantly chipping away at his Pokemon as well. Very interesting here to go for the Max Guard on that opposing Charizard, as Regieleki actually going to go straight for a Thunderbolt here. Going to go down into that imposing Incineroar and remove it from play straight away. So looks like the Thunderbolt obviously going to go into that Max Guard, but it looks like from Francesco's side, he was really wary of that Solgaleo. Like you said, Lee, that it wouldn't have had its speed reduced, so my error there, but being able to keep itself at its neutral point and having access to a move like Rock Slide, that's something that the Charizard certainly doesn't want to take. So I think Regieleki being able to try and remove it from the field was really great there from Francesco.
Yeah, it maybe indicates a little bit about the speed of this Charizard, but maybe as well Francesco just wanted to be very cautious about how he's approaching this match. Now the Grimmsnarl comes onto the field for James, and this does create a few issues because things like Thunder Wave, things like screens will slow that Charizard down, and we've already seen the damage of one Thunderbolt here. We know another one is going to be able to probably pick up a knockout and make it difficult to really gain any sort of momentum with the Charizard now, but the Regieleki, like everything else, kind of still sticking around on the field. Francesco identifying this, doesn't want to take the risks and switches that Charizard out. Not something we commonly see when a player goes for that Gigantamax or Dynamax with their Pokemon, but a very smart conservative play here to make sure that it sticks around for later on in this game.
Yeah, I really like this player from Francesco. You're going to be able to set up the Sun and obviously not take a Thunder Wave here on your opposing Charizard. Groudon going to be able to avoid that. And Grimmsnarl avoiding the Electro Web here as well. Zapdos is going to take, and you can see the damage, particularly with that critical hit that this Regieleki is capable of doing. It looks so happy with the destruction that it is dealing out here. Zapdos goes again for that Thunderbolt. So really great switch here from Francesco. Of course, as well, the speed drops that this Regieleki are doing onto James's Pokemon are going to remain intact. And one thing that's nice for James is that Grimmsnarl doesn't worry about the speed drops. If it's got the Prankster ability, it can go for those Thunder Waves into the Charizard when it rejoins the field.
Yeah, and you know, the big problem here, I think, for James is the fact that he's left the Regieleki on the field so long. You know, if you removed it a lot sooner, you wouldn't have this issue where it's able to kind of get this chip damage off every turn and threaten with these speed control drops that we're seeing all the time.
Oh, huge damage coming out from that Regieleki as Groudon's going to follow up with a Rock Slide. Is going to be able to connect. The Reflector's up though, so it's going to be dealing less damage. And of course, not very effective on that Solgaleo anyway. So Solgaleo able to hang around here, but the thing is Regieleki is able to deal out such damage with that Thunderbolt.
Yeah, and you know, you can throw a Light Screen up here, but I think Solgaleo's solo health now, you know, a Thunderbolt and a Precipice Blades combination is going to be more than enough to deal with both targets sitting on the field, and then it just leaves Zapdos. So I think Solgaleo is probably taking a little bit too much damage for it to be as useful as you kind of want it to be in the end game, as maybe James had planned. But again, it boils down to the fact that Regieleki has just been allowed to sit here from Francesco and just have that kind of a choice of what it wants to do, you know, Electro Web this turn, Thunderbolt this turn, and just showing how effective as it can be. But and this isn't to get at James, but it's because Francesco putting things next to the Regieleki that are kind of that pull your attention away. So you're not really concentrating too much down on the Regieleki. You're saying, oh well, I've got a few turns to kind of get by because it's not knocking anything out in the near term. But the problem is the long term, you leave it on the field, it is doing that. And I think that's something that James may have to adjust for going into game 2. Francesco played this fantastically, being very conservative at times, like we've seen, pulling out the Charizard, getting the Groudon in at the right time. But really, the Regielecki's the unsung hero of this entire match, really.
Yeah, 100%, and it's going to go for that Thunderbolt down into the Zapdos to be able to take game 1 there for Francesco. So huge congratulations taking that game 1. But like you said, James had some really great options in there, but Regieleki was just so strong, and I think it was amazing how Francesco was able to have the Regieleki and then another threat next to it, and that forced James
readdress and readjust going into this next match, which would be really nice to see.
Yeah, well, let's jump into game 2 and see exactly how our players are going to be able to adapt. And I wonder if Regieleki will make a little appearance. And there it is, out front with the Charizard once again for Francesco. And then the opposing side of the field for James, Solgaleo and Grimmsnarl. And I love this adjustment, being able to apply pressure to that Charizard straight away with the potential Thunder Wave.
Yeah, it's a nice adjustment here from James, and like you say, there's no really reason for Francesco to adjust what worked so well for him in game 1. But James making the adjustment here, obviously going to be a bit threatened by the Charizard, but the fact that he has that Thunder Wave support is huge with the Grimmsnarl here. Really makes it difficult to utilize the Charizard, especially if the Solgaleo's got something like a Max Rockfall that it can hit into that target with.
Exactly, we are going to see the switch straight away, as Francesco did last time he was facing down against the Thunder Wave on the Grimmsnarl and bringing in the Groudon. It's going to set up the Sun as well, and that can be something that the Charizard can benefit from if it comes in a little bit later on. And I think critically as well, you can now apply pressure with your Groudon to the opposing Solgaleo. And it looks like James is actually going straight away for a Dynamax here in turn 1. It's going to be that Solgaleo itself. So interesting to see the change of Dynamax Pokemon here. Maybe thinking I can't really win the war against the speed, so I'm just going to try and pick up some KOs and maybe try and put a stop to this Regieleki before it's able to get up to too many tricks. Grimmsnarl did indeed go for that Thunder Wave to no avail into the Groudon. Regieleki actually going to get out of there and go straight away for the Volt Switch, knowing that it is potentially going to be the target of something from this Solgaleo. And if Solgaleo was going for something based off a ground type move, maybe something like a Max Quake, Francesco could just bring in the Charizard here that's going to be able to avoid it, and then Charizard's sitting in a nicer position next to the Groudon. Of course, you still have to worry about the Grimmsnarl going for a Thunder Wave, but instead just going to be that Incineroar.
Yeah, maybe not wanting to risk bringing in the Charizard and losing it so quickly, but I think the switch here from Francesco is really nice. But James putting on a lot of pressure from turn 1, saying, yeah, I don't really mind if you go for these Electro Webs. I've got a Solgaleo, doesn't really mind about those speed drops because of my ability, and I'm just going to start really disrupting from my point of view. Got the Solgaleo on the field now, extremely good position against the Groudon Incineroar. You've got Grimmsnarl support, you can put up screen support this next turn, which is, you know, really beneficial. But the nice thing that Francesco's done here is to kind of mitigate the screen support a little bit is by getting his Incineroar onto the field with that fake out. So you can go for the fake out into the Grimmsnarl on James's side, prevent the screens going up, and then if you do decide to max your Groudon here, you can potentially get a big attack off into the Solgaleo, but it's risky because you know that there's a weakness policy on that Solgaleo, and if you aren't confident that you can knock it out in one hit, it's a very difficult Pokemon to kind of target into with super effective attacks, and that's one of the beauties about Solgaleo and why it's such a dangerous restricted Pokemon that players kind of opt to use.
Yeah, something like the weakness policy can really turn a game into your favor, particularly like you said, Lee, the fact that it can be that Dynamax Pokemon, get that extra bulk with kind of the HP being doubled, can put it in such a strong position. And then because it has such an interesting move pool as well with the different types of mat moves that it can offer, does make it quite a formidable threat. Of course, it's open team sheet, so our players do have that little bit of insight, but in a way that can make things more difficult because you know exactly the options that your opponent has. Incineroar's going to switch in for James, though, going to apply the Intimidate right back to the opposing Incineroar and also onto that opposing Groudon. Francesco just going to utilize the fake out opportunity, do a little bit of chip to that Incineroar as Solgaleo goes for the max Steel Spike. So boosting up the defenses on James's side of the field and dealing significant damage to that opposing Groudon as well. I think it was a nice switch because Grimmsnarl, as much as it wanted to set up the Reflect, was going to have to take the fake out, wouldn't move, and then would take possibly unnecessary damage. The fact that Incineroar can come in here facing down a Groudon that's at -1 where the Incineroar is at +1 is very, very nice. But Francesco is going to go for that Swords Dance and boost back up that Groudon.
Yeah, now sitting on +2, very well. It's not +2, sorry. It's just +1 because of the Intimidate there from the Incineroar on James' side of the field. The defensive boost from the Steel Spikes is going to be useful against the Groudon in particular. But again, I think James is having a hard time where Francesco's kind of stalling out these max turns very well, and James isn't really getting the return that he's wanting to from these turns, especially if we do see the Groudon go for the Dynamax here. It's going to be in a position to really able to take any attack from the Solgaleo and return with potentially a Max Quake that could pick up the knockout depending on the Steel Spikes coming out or not. The other thing is, does Groudon just hold it, just wait to Dynamax, maybe one turn, wait for the Solgaleo not to be maxed anymore, and then decide to attack into it?
Yeah, that's a nice way to sort of bypass around the potential weakness policy there. Groudon is going to have to take another Steel Spike, so Solgaleo really trying to make sure that it's getting up that bulk in the face of that Groudon. Any Precipice Blades or Max Quakes coming in its way, it wants to be best prepared to go against them. Incineroar going to go for the parting shot, but to no avail into the protect of the Groudon. So a really nice protect there from Francesco. And I also like this going for the U-turn into the opposing Incineroar. It's a little bit of chip, but it does allow Francesco the opportunity to pivot a Pokemon in from the back. If it's something like that Regieleki, you can start applying some pressure with those powerful Thunderbolts as well.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, you know, it's not just there, the Regieleki, if that does decide to come in, is a kind of a way of speed control, but it does have the ability to hit some big damage like we saw in Game 1. Not opting for that, though, as we see the Charizard make its way into the field. An interesting choice because the sun isn't actually up, but it does give Francesco maybe a little bit of room to play around to get that sun back up, maybe switch the Groudon out, forgo those attack boosts that you've got, get the Incineroar back onto the field, and maybe just have that fake out with the Charizard going into the next turn, potentially where you could go for the max and then switch into the Groudon and get that solar power activated once again.
Yeah, exactly. A few options here, and if you're Francesco, you need to make sure that you are protecting the Pokemon that you need for that end game of the situation. You maybe don't want to switch out your Groudon because it's got that boost up, but at the same time, if you want to be able to reset the weather for your Charizard, then that is a sacrifice you're going to have to make. And if I was Francesco right now, I'd be really trying to think about which Pokemon I need to be able to take down the remaining Pokemon on James's side of the field. And Francesco's not going to be making any switches, instead committing straight away to the Dynamax.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be, well, is it going to be the Groudon? No, it's going to be the Charizard. Does make sense, though. It is the fastest thing on the field, you know. Is going to be able to potentially hit the Solgaleo before it is able to move, and then combine that with the residual damage that you can get off with the Groudon, kind of maybe getting the Precipice Blades this turn in, picking up the knockout onto the Incineroar. It's a nice option here from Francesco, putting pressure on the end of the turn for James's Dynamax turns that he's just finished.
Yeah, going to be going through the Protect, still dealing a decent chunk of damage, and I think critically, like you said, getting that residual damage up. But of course, the drawback of this is you're going to be activating up the weakness policy. So depending on the speeds going forward, this could be a little bit difficult for the Charizard. But the Precipice Blades is going to come off and find its mark onto the opposing Incineroar. Oh, even despite the boost, I was going to say, that's a lot of damage, Lee.
Yeah, a lot of damage, but really well survived there from the Incineroar. Expected it to actually go down on the +1, but now able to kind of remove that additional Swords Dance boost to the Groudon here and pivot out, meaning that Incineroar can kind of stick around for later, giving James the opportunity to bring something in like that Grimmsnarl again to make use of those Thunder Waves, make it difficult to utilize the Charizard and take advantage of this weakness policy that's just been activated on the Solgaleo.
Yeah, the Grimmsnarl coming in here I think is really nice for James. Like you said, you can apply pressure with the Thunder Wave, you can potentially set up some screens here. And it's the interesting situation where even if Francesco maybe is forced to go for something like a max guard, Solgaleo can capitalize on the weakness policy, and maybe it now comes down to that Groudon maybe trying to find its mark on those Precipice Blades.
Yeah, and that's always what it's going to be with Groudon. You know, if it is relying on Precipice Blades to hit its target, there's always a chance it can miss. It's never something you want to be 100% relying on. But it does make the Charizard's life a lot more difficult here. Thunder Wave coming out into the Charizard, and then maybe a Rock Slide from the Solgaleo. You could also flinch the Groudon as well, but you would definitely take down that Charizard if that is the option that James is going for. So not out of the game yet, and putting himself in all these really great positions, especially there with the Incineroar pivot out to get the Grimmsnarl in. Such a key time in this match.
Yeah, exactly. And Francesco, like you said, has a bit of a difficult decision to make here in terms of the Charizard. Do you keep it in? Do you protect it? Do you maybe switch out? Got to remember there's Regieleki and Incineroar in the back as well. They could come in and maybe take one of these attacks. Incineroar is going to come in, and for that Groudon, going to throw across the Intimidate. That's only really going to be able to affect that opposing Grimmsnarl, but I think having access to the Fake Out, if potentially the Charizard has gone for the Max Guard this turn, which it has, that means Charizard can be a little bit safer in that next turn. You can apply that Fake Out into the opposing Grimmsnarl.
Yeah, the problem would be if the Incineroar's knocked out here from the Solgaleo. It is +2, and obviously the Intimidates don't affect it because of that full metal body ability that it has. Is it going to be enough? No, the Incineroar is going to be able to take this. Obviously a resisted hit, and like you say, Luke, now that Francesco's got the Incineroar onto the field with an active Fake Out, it kind of makes it hard to utilize the Grimmsnarl with that Thunder Wave, then putting the Charizard kind of back into a dominant position where it's going to be able to get rid of the Solgaleo once again.
And you can see the residual damage from the Wildfire as well, sort of crossing through James's Pokemon here. But, I mean, I really like that Max Guard coming out from the Charizard. Max Guard's often one of those things that it's so difficult to lock in as a player because you know that you only have 3 turns of Dynamax. And do you necessarily want to use one where you can't get boosts and you can't deal damage? But sometimes that's what you need to be able to pivot or maybe waste a turn of your opponent's side. And I think that protect that from the Charizard, making sure that Incineroar was there by its side to be able to protect it, has been really good for Francesco, and actually means he's able to make the most of the Dynamax turns. You know, 2 out of 3, definitely not going to be bad if it also allows you Charizard can hang around for the rest of the game without having to take the Thunder Wave here. There's going to be a switch from James though. Actually, it looks like it's a double switch. We're going to see the Incineroar jump out into the field and Zapdos replace the Grimmsnarl here on this occasion. So a lot of changes here from James, as Incineroar does go for that Fake Out into the opposing Zapdos, does a little bit of chip, but Charizard is now free to once again go for that Wildfire. It was going into what was the Solgaleo, going to find its mark on Incineroar, and it is strong enough to be able to pick up the KO.
Yeah, and it's you know, I think James's hand was kind of forced there. If you want to preserve the Solgaleo till for later on this game, you had to switch it out at that point. The Incineroar is a nice switch in, of course, because it, you know, it is resisting that hit, but just so powerful that Charizard is able to pick up the knockout with how low health the Incineroar was anyway. Now the Grimmsnarl going to come in, going to have another opportunity to potentially get this Thunder Wave going, and you know, the Zapdos in a position now where it can potentially, depending on well, the Incineroar I think is assault vested on Francesco's side, which makes it very unlikely that you're going to be able to pick up a knockout onto it. It's kind of like the way you would want to Thunder Wave into the Charizard, pick up the knockout onto the Incineroar. We could potentially double into the Incineroar here with the Grimmsnarl, expecting the Charizard to protect because of how wary Francesco has been this whole game about allowing his Charizard to not be Thunder Waved. You kind of think they'd either switch or protect it here.
Yeah, well, it's going to be the switch, bringing in the Regieleki this time. Again, Pokemon not going to be phased by a Thunder Wave coming in its way. And it's happy to join us here on the field. This Grimmsnarl does indeed go for the Reflect. So just going to protect out from any of those physical type moves potentially coming out from something like the Incineroar. Thunderbolt coming out from Zapdos though, but you can see the Assault Vest really paying off to that opposing Incineroar that can then also go for this U-turn, switch out. Not enough to pick up a KO against that Grimmsnarl, but I think the residual damage is going to be able to come into effect here for Francesco.
Yeah, and that's the big kind of kicker here is the residual damage, and we see again how useful it is for these players to take advantage of something like this in a game where it's kind of slowing down at points and you kind of need to make room to readjust board positions, etc. That residual damage doesn't let up. It just carries on for 4 turns, and it gets to the point where it either knocks things out or puts Pokemon into range for other Pokemon like Regieleki to come in and kind of clean up, and that's one of the real drawbacks of it if you're going up against it.
Yeah, and Grimmsnarl, you can see, has been KO'd by the G-Max Wildfire Flames, so we'll be returning to its trainer. And, you know, this is where things now start to get a little bit sort of tentative here for James. You have got the Zapdos, but there's not always a lot the Zapdos can really do to an opposing Groudon. And in return, Groudon can deal a lot of damage to both Solgaleo and the Zapdos with Precipice Blades and Rock Slide, respectively. Yeah,
and then you've still got to consider as well the Thunderbolt from the Regieleki that would be coming probably into that Solgaleo slot. And if you're Zapdos and James' side, you're probably relying on Heat Wave to hit the Regieleki over most things, considering the sun is up. Is that going to be enough to take down the Groudon? Probably not, but then Groudon's kind of attention is split between, do I Rock Slide to hit the Zapdos, or do I Earthquake, Precipice Blades to hit the Solgaleo?
Yeah, well, Regieleki is going to help out with a little bit of damage from the Electro Rev, and I think critically lowering the speed of that Zapdos as well. That could just be helpful with the Pokemon in the back. There's going to be the Rock Slide, however, so James really was wanting to try and take down that Zapdos as much as possible. And although you wouldn't have got the speed drop on the Solgaleo from the Electro Web, still that little bit of damage could be critical. Yeah,
and the residual damage now stopped, but against, you know, 4 Pokemon and Francesco's side of the field, going to just be a little bit too much for this one Solgaleo to deal with, especially when you've got the Regieleki there, going to be able to get a Thunderbolt off before anything else can move on the field, and is enough to wrap it up and Francesco take this game 2-0.
Fantastic play there from Francesco, and of course Regieleki there being able to seal up the set, but commiserations as well to James. It was a really interesting team and I loved being able to see it play.